Okay, so welcome everyone to the Fall SWOG Cancer Survivorship Committee meeting. Hopefully everyone is doing well. We are delighted to be able to share with you today some updates from our committee and to have our exciting guest presentation and to hear your feedback as well as in regards to our initiatives or any future concepts or whatnot. So we will get started. Oh, okay. So we have no, I have no disclosure, and Hallie's disclosing her her disclosures right there. Okay, so just to remind everyone, some of our committee priorities that Hallie and I have tried to pay attention to and encourage concepts in over the last couple of years. The first being prevention of long-term effects of treatment, in particular cardiovascular complications, infertility, immunotherapy toxicities, and sexual dysfunction. Another major area of interest is our reduction in comorbidity and improving cancer outcomes. So looking at exercise and dietary interventions on various survivorship outcomes and other behavioral and survivorship interventions. Of note, in the most recent NCI priorities for the fiscal year 2022, there are 5 major areas of focus, and 2 of them are obesity and cancer, and then cancer survivorship. So I very much encourage you all to read that information from the NCI, because that is going to really set their budget and program announcements and RFAs that will be coming out over the next year. I will make sure to send you the link to that if you don't have it, but it was exciting to see that cancer survivorship is a major aspect of that new plan. Another major important topic is reduction in health disparities, and the focus of our meeting today. We're also interested in mHealth and technology and care delivery, and then expanding beyond the common cancer diagnoses and considering metastatic survivorship issues. We want to remind you that one of the major benefits of being a SWOG member is access to funding and through the Hope Foundation. And there are a number of application deadlines coming up. So I encourage you to go to the SWOG and Hope Foundation website to learn more, and also reach out to Hallie and me. We can help you with these applications and the development of the concepts. The first one is the John Crowley deadline of October 15th. Followed by December 1, the seed funding. So this is about $50,000 for pilot funding. This is really important, and if provide this pilot funding, it can help lead to support a larger SWOG, NCTN or Aacr study. So we look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of applications in response to that funding announcement. There's also a number of other programs we highlighted in our last SWOG Survivorship Committee meeting with various deadline dates. You can see them all listed here. The SWOG Hope Impact Award, the secondary data analyses. There's no deadline for the secondary data analyses, and there is statistical support provided with this. We really encourage committee members to think about analyses that can be done here that often lead to high impact papers, publications, and also can provide strong preliminary data for future grants. Some other opportunities are with the grant writing workshop, career engagement award, the Coltman Fellowship, which is $50,000 in 2 years of salary support to early career investigators. So this is a great opportunity for those earlier in their career, similar to kind of like a K award, providing the effort, coverage, and some pilot funding. And then the Young Investor Training Course is really a great way to get oriented to SWOG and the Aacr NCTN structure and the processes involved in submitting concepts and carrying out studies. And then lastly, some additional funding here, opportunities. Hallie and I, you and I should discuss some more detailed committee group meeting funds for the April meeting, perhaps. And then there's other awards and programs here as well. Lastly, we wanted to make aware of the SWOG clinical trial partnerships. This is an independent limited liability corporation. And the mission is to, as you can see here, improve the lives through cancer clinical trials and translational research. There's information here on how this organization structure can help with clinical trials. So we will make sure that you have access to these slides as well to refer to this information. Okay, so with all of that information, we now want to really focus in on a critically important topic, not just to the survivorship committee within SWOG, but across SWOG and in general in cancer research, and that is cancer health disparities. I'm delighted that we have Dr. Tiffany Wallace with us today to share her thoughts and NCI's thoughts in this space. Dr. Wallace is Program Director in the Office of the Director of the NCI's CRCHD since 2014, and in this role, she contributes to programmatic efforts to strengthen NCI's cancer health disparity research portfolio that includes basic, clinical, translational, and population-based research. And her additional roles include contributing to the grant management of research in cancer health disparities, and also to the Provocative Question Initiative. Prior to joining NCI, Dr. Wallace was an oncology scientist at the Human Genome Sciences, which is a biopharmaceutical corporation acquired by GlaxoSmithKline in 2011. She received her PhD in biomedical sciences from the University of Florida in Gainesville and completed her postdoc training at NCI, where she conducted translational research on biological factors as they contribute to cancer health disparities. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Wallace, and we will turn the slides over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me just get my slides up quickly. I'm sorry. Okay, we'll swap. Okay, well, thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak today. As was mentioned, I'm a program director at the NCI. I work in the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities. And much of the work that I do is focused exclusively on advancing cancer disparities research. And so today I'm going to go through a little bit about what we do at NCI around disparities research, and specifically some activities I've been involved in. So the agenda for today's talk is really going to be broken up into three main areas. I'm going to start with just one slide to review the overall mission of our center. And then I'm going to switch and talk a little bit more about how we define disparities at NCI and some of the specific activities we've been involved in. And then I'm going to end with a little bit more of a focus in specifically on cancer survivorship research. So as I mentioned, I'm at the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities. I assume many of you have visited our main campus at Bethesda, Maryland. However, CRCHD is located on our Rockville campus at Shady Grove, as shown here. So CRCHD was started in 2001, and it was designed to help address the unequal burden of cancer in our society. And our charge falls really on three main areas. The first is to help advance cancer disparities research, and we do this across the whole cancer continuum. I work with all of the divisions, offices, and centers at NCI to make sure that we're pushing this field forward and getting research initiatives out into the extramural community. We also have a pretty large role in providing guidance and advice on things like strategic planning, policies that might be related to either disparities research or diversity training. And then lastly, we're largely involved in leading NCI's efforts in increasing workforce diversity. So we have training opportunities for investigators starting as early as middle school, going all the way up until early stage investigator status. And are focused in on investigators who are typically underrepresented in biomedical research. But again, for today, I'm going to focus not on our diversity efforts, but on our disparities work. So before I get too deep into the talk, I wanted to just quickly review how NCI defines cancer disparities, since I know that this is a definition that tends to vary a little bit across the research community. But for NCI, we define disparities as adverse differences that exist between certain population groups in a really wide range of cancer measures. So this could include anything from incidence to mortality, survivorship, or quality of life, or screening rates, and so on. And when we talk about population groups, this is also very broad. Of course, racial and ethnicity is included, but also includes persons with disabilities, gender and sexual identity, geographic location, and various SES factors. What we do know, given this broad term, there are a lot of cancer disparities that exist in the United States. This is across different cancers and populations, and we're interested in understanding the contributors to these disparities and reducing them. We also know that cancer disparities are exceedingly complicated. There's a lot of different contributors. They're often interacting with each other, and so it's a very complicated puzzle. And while we know that socioeconomic factors and access to care are likely contributing to the majority of these disparities, we also recognize that there are contributors related to genetics and biology, environment, diet, activity, and so forth. And so for the last few years, we've been putting some efforts into understanding more the genetic and biological factors and how these interact. And so we're looking to advance basic and translational research. But this is the caveat that we understand that that piece is just one small piece in a very large puzzle. So when I talk about translational research, you know, we're talking about research that starts typically at the bench, basic biomedical research, gets translated into the clinic to help patients, and then often is further translated and implemented into the community where it can lead to improved public health. And it's interesting that this is bidirectional, right? It could be something you observe in the community or at the clinic and then work to go back to the bench to explain. But regardless, basic and translational research in disparities is exceedingly challenging. We know this because, first and foremost, there's a really well-documented poor representation of racial and ethnic minority populations in therapeutic clinical trials. Now, NCI has been working hard on this for a number of years, and through the NCTN and NCORP, we are seeing an increase in recruitment of minority patients, but it's still, you know, not where it needs to be. Furthermore, of those patients that do contribute or participate, there's a well-documented reservation for some patients to donate biospecimens, and this leads to poor diversity in biorepositories and within data cohorts. Furthermore, there's a lack of standardization of data elements that are collected from patients that are in these cohorts. And this makes it really hard to come back later to do secondary data analysis and ask a different question if not all of the required elements are being collected from the patient. And then lastly, there's of course a debate that exists on if biological differences amongst diverse populations can even contribute to differences in treatment and outcome disparities. But despite all of those challenges, there is good news. NCI does find basic and translational disparities research as one of their priorities. It's well known at NCI that we have to achieve diverse racial and ethnic representation in all of our precision medicine efforts to ensure that these advancements are going to be equitable across the entire patient population. And if we don't do this well, we run the risk of exacerbating these disparities. Well, there have been some advancements. On the next slide, I'll show you just a quick snapshot of some of the funding opportunities that are currently open in this space. And it's not even a complete list, but we are funding more of this type of research at NCI. We're also putting a little bit of effort into generating better and more cancer models that could be useful for preclinical work, and making sure that they're authenticated. And I'll talk a little bit about a quick thing that we've done for this. And then there's just more evidence in the field. There's more publications coming out. There's more conferences focusing on this. AACR's annual meeting last year had a plenary session and an opening session on this topic. So it's definitely growing, and there's more support. It's emerging. So this is that list of funding opportunities that are currently open in this area of research. Obviously, if you're interested and don't see something that aligns with your interests, we always recommend you go to grants.gov to see what newest opportunities come out. But we have opportunities focused in basic research. We have a great supplement opportunity that is focused if you have an NCI funded grant, but you're not incorporating disparities research at this point. This is on any discipline of research, and you want to add an aim to include it. We have a 2-year funding support for that. So that's good. There's one more receipt date, I believe, remaining. And then we have a lot of organ-specific opportunities, multiple myeloma, liver, lung. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check those out. And one of the ways we've been trying to really integrate disparities into translational research is by collaborating with existing programs. One of the best known programs at NCI is the SWORs. You've likely heard of the SWORs. They've been around for over 30 years. They're very large programs. They're center grants. They have multiple projects, multiple components. But the hallmark of this program is translational research. And it's focused on anything from prevention all the way through treatment to cancer and survivorship. Typically, the SWORs are organized by organ site. So over here, you can look up a SWOR by organ site. But we've been encouraging also groups to come in with a different organization. So cancers that are grouped by they're highly related or share a mutation, but also cross-cutting themes. And cancer disparities falls into that last category. Unfortunately, to date, no funded SWOR has been exclusively focused on addressing disparities. And these are really competitive programs to get funded. So we have a planning grant opportunity that's been active. It closes in just a month from now. But we've awarded 8 P20 planning grants. They basically look like mini SWORs in the hopes that they can become competitive. And these go from breast, prostate, lung, colon, gastric, oral. They're the ones that are funded are a wide range of focus, and also looking at African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Alaska Natives. Now, as a note, we're also hoping to get more rural disparities and SES disparities in the portfolio as well. Another quick thing I'll touch on is our efforts on developing more cancer models that might be appropriate for advancing disparities research. In some form or another, we have contributed to funding all of these models that are shown here through supplements or contracts. But we realized that by spreading our efforts really wide, we're kind of diluting our impact. And so we wanted to focus in on a model, the patient-derived xenograft model, PDXs. While they're not perfect, they do reflect more of the physiological aspects of a tumor as seen in the patient and are a great tool for doing really early preclinical studies that can inform clinical trials and early phase clinical trials. And so at our center, we saw that there was a network that had started in 2017. It's called the PDX Net, PDX Development and Trial Centers Research Network. It's a large network. It has 4 U54 centers that are currently funded and a coordinating center that organizes everything. And all these centers develop large PDX models, and then they do preclinical testing with targeted therapeutic agents to try to prioritize and inform early phase clinical trials. Now, we saw the great advantage here, and we're able to get 2 additional centers awarded in 2018. And they function along in the network as all of the other centers, but they're focused in on developing models that are primarily from underrepresented minority populations. And their research is focused more on conducting disparities research to understand therapeutic disparities. What's nice about this network is that all of the models go into NCI managed repository called the PDMR, and these are available to the research community. And so we're happy to see this repository becoming more and more diverse. I want to touch really quickly on big data, since this is an area that's always increasing and becoming more and more advanced every day. There's always some very important considerations when doing work in the space of big data. Obviously, data sharing is critical to making sure that the benefits are being spread across the community. But with data sharing comes ethics and privacy concerns, not just for the patient, but also for the researcher. And so NCI has a lot of policies on data sharing. I'm sure you're all familiar with them if you're funded by NCI or NIH. I just put this slide up here encouraging you to review what NCI's Cancer Research Data Commons has. We have a number of repositories available. We've moved our data to the cloud to make it more accessible and easier to analyze. And it's a really wonderful resource for doing secondary analyses and so forth. When we're looking at big data, there's just some challenges and concerns that are really specific to disparities research. Generalizability of patients is probably the biggest concern when you're looking in these data sets. Every data set obviously is going to have a different representation of racial and ethnic representation. And you have to consider that when doing data on a cohort that might not have a lot of diversity. But also some institutions may have different collection practices for their EHRs or abilities to share data. And so you have to consider big and small institutions may have to do this differently, and every data set is unique. Also, there's a lack of standardization, as I mentioned, of very common data elements, and we're trying to address that and make it a little bit more universal. And then as findings are starting to translate into interventions, again, we really need to make sure that diversity is included, and so that all patients are benefiting equitably. AI, or artificial intelligence, is a wonderful tool we're leaning on more and more, but it's only as good as the data that's fed in. So we have to consider diversity. A quick note about small data. NCI published a paper about 5 years ago on the essential and importance of small data, which they define as data sets that are either too small or just don't have the accessibility of populations, and it makes them have inadequate sample sizes. This could be subpopulations or geographic locations. And we recognize that there's a critical need to develop better methodological and analytical procedures that can allow these smaller subpopulations to be meaningfully included in research. Because at NCI, we see it as our obligation to improve the health of all populations, not just the majority or those that are easy to identify. And so there's an active provocative question FOA that's currently available. If this is an area you're interested in, to develop methods that might be appropriate to study these small populations or rare populations. And we're hoping that this will come out with some unique ways to do this. So in my final slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the efforts at NCI and considerations for cancer survivorship research. Again, NCI's definition for survivorship is an individual is considered a cancer survivor from the time of diagnosis through the balance of his or her life. And survivors include those living with cancer and those who are cancer-free. So you could imagine, and you well know, there's many different types of survivors. Those that are just diagnosed and undergoing treatment, those that have had treatment are currently cancer-free, and those that are living with cancer and metastatic disease. Now, NCI recognizes the huge growing number of cancer survivors in the US. Currently, I think in this chart in 2019, there was something like just under 17 million cancer survivors in the US. And by 2040, they're expecting this to go almost to over 26 million. So it's a huge growing population in our country. Now, there are disparities in cancer survivorship as well. Unfortunately, racial and ethnic minorities and the medically underserved have a more increased burden from the adverse effects of cancer, as well as the effects of cancer treatment. This can be seen across physical, emotional, psychosocial, and financial challenges. I'm going to do a quick shout out to the Aacr Cancer Disparities Progress Report. If you're not familiar with this, it was just released, I think, last week. There was a congressional briefing. It's a wonderful resource. It's over 150 pages talking about cancer disparities, kind of a snapshot of where we're at now, and really highlighting where we need to go in the next few years. And they talk nicely in that about the disparities that are seen in health and quality of life after a diagnosis and how broad they are. African American women have a twofold increase risk of getting breast cancer related lymphedema when compared to whites. Survivors living in rural areas are 23% more likely to have psychosocial distress. And colorectal cancer survivors that have low SES are 50% more likely to have anxiety and depression than white or those with high SES. So we know that this is a problem, and we recognize that multidisciplinary approaches are really critical to addressing some of these disparities we've observed. This is going to require the involvement of oncologists and clinicians, in addition to basic applied and clinical researchers. And then, of course, critical to this is patient advocates and getting input from community members as we move these advancements forward. As was just mentioned by Dr. Irwin, every year NCI publishes their annual plan and budget proposal. This is prepared for the President and Congress to show what we believe to be the most important areas and a reason to invest in the future. You can see here there were 4 scientific priorities listed in this year, and cancer survivorship was listed as one of them. This is definitely a growing population and of critical concern for us. So expect more FOAs and RFAs, as was mentioned. Also, the Bo Biden Cancer Moonshot Initiative is critical to this space. I'm sure you've all heard of it by now as part of the 21st Century Cures Act, and designed to accelerate cancer research and make more therapies available to patients, improve prevention and diagnosis. Interestingly, amongst the 10 recommendations that were made within this moonshot, cancer disparities were identified as a cross-cutting theme across all of them. And it was really important to include in all of our funding opportunities. To date, we've had over 75 funding opportunities that resulted from Moonshot, and it's actually expected more to come as we're beginning more than halfway through this. But I'll highlight one initiative that came out of Moonshot that's directly related to survivorship. These awards were just issued, they're just starting their first year, but it's focused on optimizing the management and the outcomes for cancer survivors transitioning to follow-up care. And so it's designed to stimulate interventional research that's aimed at enhancing the communication, the engagement, and the coordination that exists between oncology specialists and physicians with providers that are not normally involved in the active cancer treatment. This is really designed to optimize follow-up care. It'll free up some oncologists to focus in on active patients and allow these cancer survivors to get more coordinated care. I felt like I couldn't finish a talk on this topic without at least mentioning COVID-19 pandemic and its effect, not just on cancer survivors, but obviously racial and ethnic minorities and medically underserved in our country. It's been shown and well documented that cancer survivors have a really unique issues and needs that may be exacerbated in this pandemic. This goes again across physical, psychosocial, and healthcare delivery challenges. I'll point you again to the AACR's Cancer Disparities Progress Report. They talk about this in a special portion of their progress report, highlighting all of the disparities that have been identified in this short time since the pandemic has begun. And none of this is very shocking, and we have a unique opportunity to really try to address this. It's clear that the causes of these COVID-19 related disparities are likely a combination of factors, stemming likely from systemic racism and issues that exist in our country, but also underlying comorbidities and risk factors that just aren't necessarily avoidable, such as where a person may live or what their occupation is. So I'll end with some of the efforts NCI and NIH in general is doing to address this critical need. They initiated a large initiative called RADx. This is Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics Initiative. They had 4 separate programs under this. They're all designed to help to develop and commercialize and implement unique options for testing for COVID-19. And one of the programs is focused in on underserved populations. And it's the goal that this initiative will understand the factors that are associated with the disparities in COVID-19 and also lay a foundation to reduce these disparities for those that are vulnerable and highly affected by this pandemic. And they allocated over $500 million for this over the next few years. So certainly a priority. But at that, I'm going to pause. I'm happy to address any questions, but if you have any follow-up questions after this meeting, you can certainly reach out to me by email or keep them up with us on social media.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. That was really informative, a lot of important information for our membership. I encourage those listening in, you can either type in your question into chat and either I can read it for you, or I think you can unmute yourself. I'm not sure that's possible.
So if you raise your hand, you can be unmuted in order to ask your question. So we would very much appreciate everybody's participation.
So Catherine Guthrie, I know you had a question. If you want to ask it first. Or
am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'm really curious. It's really excellent to hear your talk, Dr. Wallace, and to hear firsthand about these efforts at the NCI level. I'm curious about, there's a lot of talk about diversity, and I think that that's extremely important. But I wonder about how you approach research topics and research proposals and questions in terms of not only who they represent, but whether they represent advancement in terms of anti-racism. That what they're addressing are really the actual problems, not just sort of biological issues, which I know is controversial, but hey, I'll leave it there.
No, I completely understand the question, and yes, recent months, although are really heartbreaking and tragic, the news have really led to some positive changes at NCI. We have established, you may have heard if you joined the NCAB, the advisory board meeting, Ned Sharp was talking about this last month or earlier this month, that we have an equity council that he has headed up. There's a number of working groups under this equity council to do just that. So there's a working group on disparities, but also one on diversity, on inclusion, and so forth. And I think some of these critical questions are going to be very closely evaluated, and hopefully some changes go about. But we do, of course, we have a lot of experts working in this field, and I think that a lot of voices, we recognize certainly biology is not the causes of disparities. It may be contributing with some of the more socioeconomic. And so understanding that a little better is important, but it's not the driving factor. And we do have a lot of research that supports that other aspect. So it's not really an answer, but I hope we're going to get even better given how much we're trying to grow and address systemic racism.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, and if others then either want to type it into chat or can unmute yourself. But I have a quick question, Dr. Wallace. So there's also the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. So for our members who are looking to submit NIH grants, if it's cancer focused, should it go to the NCI? Or when should it go to this other institute? Or are there RFAs or initiatives with the two institutes?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's kind of confusing. We do have referral guidelines on what should go to NCI and what should go to NIMHD, but as you might imagine, there's a gray zone in between. So there's no clear answer. NIMHD focuses a little bit more. Well, they don't do like animal models and so forth. So if you're doing anything basic and translational, it would likely go to NCI. We share a lot of funding opportunities. So when that comes in, we might decide where it's most appropriate after it's submitted. You might want to put on your cover letter where you think it should go. But we overlap a lot. They have specific funding opportunities that are available, you know, and so go to their website. They have more coming out all the time, and it's a great place for funding as well. I wouldn't be too worried about it though, because we'll figure it out on our end if it needs to be referred somewhere else.
Okay, great. So Brooke let me know there was a question in the Q&A, but I can't seem to pull it up or read it.
I see a question in the Q&A that says, can you say more about the score that would focus only on disparity rather than a disease? So I could address that question. Yes, so these new, not new, but these scores that we're encouraging would be focused on a theme. In this score, it's not required that you focus in on a single cancer. Many of the applications actually split their focus between a number of different cancers, but all of the research questions are addressing a disparity. It doesn't have to be focused strictly on treatment. You know, we do have population focused projects as well. In fact, there's an incentive to do a population project. You get an extra, I don't know, $250K if you have a population-based study, because we know that those are sometimes even more pricey or costly. But that's it. You know, you can focus on one cancer site or multiple, but the theme has to be addressing disparities, and it has to be translational research. So those are the two requirements.
So yeah, so to follow up with that, I know the deadline is October 18th. Do you know if you will be reissuing that RFA?
So nothing is pending right now, but oftentimes those decisions get made after we take an analysis of what's in the portfolio and what we might still need. So I'm always hopeful. My goal would be to go from having a planning grant opportunity to maybe having an RFA focused in on just scores that are disparity specific. Because right now they still have to compete with all of the other scores. You know, there's not a separate opportunity, but it may happen, but I don't know. It's rare that you have an RFA that's reissued more than 2 times.
I know there's a question from Barbara. Barbara, if you want to unmute or if you want me to read it for you, it might be faster if I read. Does NCI have a % of funded researchers from minority institutions, or maybe a goal, right, in this area? There's disparities in that area as well that affect disparities in general. So
yeah,
maybe the pay line is different or something like it is for early career investigators.
Yeah, so we're working a lot on trying to increase the diversity in NCI's research portfolio, but we work a lot with the historically Black institutions, and we do try to do outreach and encourage applications there. We are also, this past year, you might be familiar with exception funding through NCI. With some of our late list or end of year funds, we were able to support a number of underrepresented minority investigators with that. So we're trying to get more diversity, not just in disparities research, but in the actual investigator. So we're always trying to improve that. Those numbers could be better, and we're putting some set aside funds for that now.
Okay, great, thank you. So for the members, I think given the NCI priorities in cancer survivorship, it's really important to think about concepts perhaps focused on delivery of survivorship care to lower cancer disparities, and the SWOG and the Aacr infrastructure is perfect to be able to ask a question such as this. Hallie and I are, here to help you, design such concepts, or if you have another area, please reach out to us. I also want to highlight what Dr. Wall showed about the AACR. There is a meeting October 2nd to 5 online on the science of cancer disparities. So make sure, if this topic interests you, to reach out to consider participating in that online conference. Let me see if there's any other chat questions.
There is. I can read this question, Melinda, that from Carol Siegel. Only 15 states, this is, I guess, a comment that they would like you to address. Only 15 states cover standard of care for those Medicaid patients who are on clinical trials, and this can affect clinical trial participation.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a comment for that. It's certainly a concern, and it's above my pay grade to address. But certainly, I think that these issues are discussed often and commonly at NCI. We have working groups on them, so I would hope that those sorts of things can be addressed. But I would just be making something up if I had something. I don't have anything thoughtful to say about that besides I know that's an issue.
I think it's an opportunity for maybe, this question is for Don Hirschman, for collaboration between the Survivorship Committee and the Cancer Care Delivery Committee, and looking at policy related or financial related programs or interventions, and how they either increase disparities and or how to lower disparities. So maybe there's some secondary data analyses or whatnot that can be done through SWOG.
Yeah, from a financial standpoint, the Cancer Care Delivery Committee completed a prospective observational study, and we're now launching a randomized intervention looking at financial navigation. And obviously that's directly related to financial hardship, which is by definition a disparity, right? So there may be some groups that will, that are built into that, and that's an R01 funded proposal. Some of the other groups have focused, ECOG Aacr has a trial right now that's focused on looking at specific SNPs in African-American women undergoing taxane-based chemotherapy to see if the rates of neuropathy are higher in those populations. So there's ways of thinking of late effects, and really trying to get enriched samples to look at maybe biologic differences in terms of prospective studies. One of the things that Aacr does well is, we have these diverse populations with minority underserved Aacr sites and both urban and rural and community centers. So thinking even of studies that, prospectively look at things that have been, published retrospectively to see, you know, if prospective data looks the same or different, could be good, and then also provides a rich database for future analyses. So I guess I would strongly encourage, we do have these, you know, very rich databases for retrospective work, but I think one of the real opportunities is trying to think of maybe some select questions in underserved populations that could be answered or addressed prospectively, because we have this rich, unique resource.
Great, thank you. I know that Hildy Dillon had a question. If you want to ask it, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Tiffany. It was really interesting, all the things that your office is doing. One of the things that we're focusing on in the Patient Advocate Committee and also in the Recruitment and Retention Committee at SWOG is to find funding for training of our investigators on how to address disparities in our clinical trials in the NCTN. And so in the work that you're doing in translational research, is there training for the investigators that are doing this research on how to engage a diverse representation of patients in their studies? I know that NCORP, as Dawn was saying, they may be in communities where this may be something that they've been working on for a long time, but I think that many of our study sites in the NCTN are not as good at this, or not as, doesn't come as natural to them to be extending our trials to a diverse population of patients.
That's a critical area. It's not worked in necessarily in the studies that I had been discussing, but I know that we've had the concept, which is, you know, we're trying to get approval for an FOA that is working specifically on what you're talking about, and a training more for the provider, particularly not just for understanding diversity. I think there was a lot of talk how the need is for LGBTQ patients, and some other populations as well. So no, nothing training isn't worked necessarily into what I had discussed today, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see something a little bit more focused on that coming out of NCI soon, because it's a topic I've heard quite a bit about. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Cindy Thompson had a question. I don't know if you're unmuted. If not, I can read it for you. Brooke, can you unmute Cindy Thompson? Okay, I'll read it for you. So it's in WHI, they are revisiting description elements related to race and ethnicity. So is NIH considering requiring greater detail in terms of specificity of individual groups in order to gain a greater understanding, move a precision approach to developing programs and therapeutics? Does that make sense, that question?
So
I think I'm on mute. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, you know, not all Blacks are African American, and not all Hispanics or Latinos, and, you know, and it seems to me, being in Arizona, that we're seeing very unique disparities for Mexican American specifically. And so I'm just curious, because I think the only way we can drive this level of detail forward is to make it a requirement to start collecting these data more purposefully, so that we can have common data elements across the studies over time that will better inform.
Yes, these kinds of questions come up a lot. So as far as categories, like obviously race is a social construct. Right. And so whether or not people are using the best categories has been debated for a long time, and it could be increasing disparities, or at least racism, in terms of how they're interpreting results. You know, I can say, I don't know if this addresses it, but we've been looking at the need to do genetic ancestry determine admixture and not use self-report, because the categories of, you know, racial categories are not necessarily a good proxy for the patient. And so there's also, you might have seen a science paper that came out from Sarah Tishkoff just a week or two ago, talking a little bit about this topic as well, a call to NIH to address race and disparities research. So it's a topic that's getting a lot of discussion, and I don't think the current situation, how it is working perfectly. And so I'm hoping we'll have some policies and guidance on the more appropriate way to use these racial categorizations in this type of research. But certainly ancestral informative markers and admixture, whether or not could be useful in trying to bypass a category, a racial construct in some instances, depending on the question being asked.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hallie, I don't see any additional questions. Do you?
Oh, and I'm just looking for raised hands, because I know those who are in the audience may not be able to ask as easily. And I don't see anything else either.
Well, Dr. Wallace, this was really a stimulating discussion, and I hope it will lead to the development of concepts within our survivorship committee. And if we have additional questions, the membership can either reach out to Hallie and me, and we can forward it on to you, or they can directly contact you as well. But thank you so much for sharing your vision and the research opportunities available within your center. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to
Very
participate.
nice.
Great, thank you. You're welcome to stay on if you want, but if you have other meetings, we understand if you need to hop off as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we did just want to open up for if people do have new ideas that are generated from this talk, or if you're just kind of trying to think of an angle, we do have a few more minutes where you can share those, and perhaps while we still have Dr. Wallace on the line, feel free to discuss. And I'll just pause here for a second in case anybody does want to bring up something, a new concept idea. I see it looks like Don has his hand raised. Don, I think we can unmute you so that you can ask your question.
Yeah, hi. I thought this was a great discussion. So I'm really interested in your rare populations initiatives at the NIH, and I'm wondering, would this be an appropriate place for implementation sciences to be submitted? I'm working with several folks in the LGBTQ space, particularly around transgender identification in clinical trials. And I'm just wondering, we've been going back and forth actually with the NIH as to where such a project might fit. And I'm wondering whether or not this is a place that might find a home for such a project within survivorship itself, but also within this funding opportunity.
So I don't know for sure if it would fit perfectly into any of the funding opportunity I may have mentioned, but like I mentioned, LGBTQ in particular is an area that we're very interested in at NCI. So there's been a couple of funding opportunities. But what I would recommend to you is to send me, if you want a specific Ames page or a quick blurb of what you're thinking about, and if I could talk to the right people, make you the right introductions to you, and we can find a place for it, whether it's an FOA that's specific for it or something a little bit more investigator initiated. It certainly seems to be a topic that I think would fit very nicely in our implementation team within our division of cancer control and population sciences.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks. And did Marie Bakitas have something else, or is that hand still raised from before? We could unmute you.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Oh, well, Dr. Wallace, this was an amazing presentation, and thank you. I'm sure that I'll be in touch again in the future. Being from Birmingham, Alabama, and our focus down here, I was surprised I didn't know about the SPOR. But anyway, Actually, my hand was raised for afterwards later in the agenda because I'm not sure I'll be able to stay. I had wanted to, when Dawn had mentioned about the collaborations, I wanted to mention that the Palliative and End of Life Care Committee is working with people with metastatic disease and has several ideas. And we're hoping to be able to collaborate with you. I saw on the agenda about survivors with metastatic disease, and that being a focus that you might be moving forward. So as one of the co-chairs of that committee, I wanted to reach out, and if we don't connect at this meeting, be able to connect subsequently.
And certainly in between meetings by email, and if people have concepts and, it'd be great to share those. Anything else that anyone wanted to bring up on this topic?
So we have a question from Allison Rosen. Allison, if you are unmuted.
Sure. So I'm brand new. This is my first SWOG. I'm the new community advocate for the AYA community, and I'm a survivor and happen to work in cancer health disparities as well. So I just have like an overall question, and like maybe you've talked about this previously. Like I said, first meeting, brand new to all of this, but I'm really interested in sort of training early in education as far as people within the field, community health workers, and sort of starting really early in maybe even going to colleges and universities to talk about the importance of public health and trying to recruit them to, be educated in the public health arena and possibly enter that field, because a lot of what we've seen is when you're out in the community doing the outreach, those underserved communities respond better to people that look like them, talk like them, and are active in their communities. So just an overall question as far as what is being done, if anything, because I really have absolutely no idea, but I'm curious.
So within our center, I'm assuming this question was for me, but within our center, we have a lot of training opportunities available across all of the disciplines for cancer that are focused in on diverse applicants. So I don't know of a specific for community health workers or community health educators, but we have like a pipeline of opportunities that just are really designed to fit any individual at any stage of their career, with the hopes of getting them through to a more independent level. We also have the and so we support a lot of CHEES through that as well, but I don't know if that includes training. So it's a great point. I'm going to actually write it down to see, because I know we certainly train diverse individuals from a very young age in all areas of science, but I don't know if we're training them in more of a community aspect. So that's a great question, and I'm going to find out if we have any opportunities for that.
I know there was an RFA out a year or two ago, an R25 to train, as you said, the pipeline, I think it was high school and college age, in cancer research, but with a focus on cancer disparities. I might be misstating the R25, but I know there was an RFA in that space.
Yeah, I think it was called the YES, Youths Engaged in Science. Yeah, and hopefully that might be continuing as well. So you're right, but I don't know if it goes to the community level or and how wide. But that's a great FOA as well. Look for it, hopefully, to continue.
Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions, comments, ideas? All right, great. So we'll move on to the next part of our agenda, which is updates from our liaisons. And we're going to start somehow. My control's not working here. So if you could advance the slide one for me.
Allie, I think it needs your arrows rather than the enter.
Yeah, I know. I know it's not working. But if Lee Jones, I saw you on the video, and so if you'd like to share with us patient advocate updates, that would be wonderful.
Yes, great. Thanks, Hallie. And thanks to both you and Melinda for all you do and your strong and ongoing leadership for the committee. We have all sorts of great ideas. We have great membership. And I'm really proud and happy to be a member of the Survivorship Committee. Two things I just wanted to mention. First, it kind of relates to what Carol Siegel had made a point of. So last week, ASCO had their annual advocacy summit, which I participated in, where we go up and talk to our representatives on Capitol Hill, both Senate and House. And there were two items as to priorities that would be of interest to the committee. One was directly related to the point that Carol made. So one of the asks was to support a bill which has been introduced in the House of Representatives, not yet in the Senate, to cover those standard healthcare costs related to participation in a clinical trial for Medicaid recipients. As Carol had mentioned, there are only about 15 states that do cover those costs. It would be good to make that something that's required on a national level. I think it's very unfair that individuals' cancer care, health care depends on what state they live in. So this would maybe have a minimum requirement on Medicaid across all the states. The second priority of interest relates to COVID-19. And we all know about the telehealth as being something that's we've been able to use during the pandemic. But one of the things that they're asking for is support for with this next COVID-19 supplement going through, that telemedicine, telehealth be enabled and allowed after the pandemic. So it would be an ongoing thing that we could continue to use. They also had asked for $15.5 billion to help restart the research process, but we know it's been closed down in many areas. So this would be money that would supplement what's currently available to NIH. And the only second thing I wanted to mention is that I am available and eager for new concepts to come through that I'm able to support. So as you all know, a patient advocate has to be involved in the starting at the design phase and even earlier if possible. So the sooner that you can get me involved in the areas of interest that you'd like to pursue, and we heard a lot of very interesting things this morning from Tiffany, so thank you for that. I'm able and eager to support those, so keep them coming. As we see the number of cancer survivors in the US is increasing, and us survivors need as much support as we can to maintain and reestablish our quality of life. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks for all of your hard work with this committee and with all of your other advocacy responsibilities. We also have liaisons from various other disease and specialty committees. And so we've asked our liaisons from those committees to provide us with any updates with respect to their specific area. And some of you are on the line today. I think Dr. Van Veldhuizen is on the line. If you want to share updates from the GU committee.
Sure. It sounds like I have background here, but yes, not a lot of updates. There was a study by Tanya Dorff with testosterone replacement in patients that have undergone curative therapy for their prostate and are have low androgen levels. And that is actually RO1 funded, and we're getting additional pilot data with regard to safety, and I'm hoping it'll circle back, but accrual's been hampered a bit by COVID. That's really the only thing in the pipeline right now. But if there's any new ideas or any concepts, happy to help connect with the GU committee or help push them forward any way we can. So that's it.
Great, thank you. There was a young investigator who also had a study that kind of passed by this committee, but I think is mostly being developed. It was a kidney cancer study. I don't know if there's anything any help from us that is required on that concept.
Yeah, that was kind of in between here and palliative care, and so it actually is being they're getting pilot data. I think there's 4 or 5 patients they have currently, and as we get a bigger number, hopefully that can circle back. That's really looking at it's called CareGive, and a platform to look at toxicities related to treatment.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I know the breast committee meets later today. Melinda, any updates you're aware of with respect to survivorship in the breast committee?
No, I'm going to participate in that. So am I getting feedback too? I'm going to participate in that session. Then I have a follow-up meeting with the committee chair as well to kind of see of any potential concepts that we could pursue together.
Great. And then we'll get an update later about our one study in that committee, the Cardiotoxicity Study. Stacy Cohen, I think you had, are you on the line? I think you were planning to be on this meeting.
Yes, I'm here. I don't have major updates from the GI committee. We met yesterday, but it was more of an open meeting as opposed to our usual closed meeting. But there are various concepts in development that involve immunotherapy. So if folks have particular interest in survivorship questions related to that, then I'd be happy to help connect folks. But I would say our major efforts are all kind of in different therapeutics at this point.
I would just, and I don't know if this is on your agenda, I apologize for interrupting. There is a study that's being done through symptom management and quality of life, and I think they're probably going to present it later today. That is a prospective cohort study for patients on IO therapy, looking at risk of developing IR AEs. But it is an opportunity to think in this large cohort of other potential survivorship questions that one could do a sub-study on. So it might be worthwhile, engaging with that group.
And I think especially if things can, I know we're going to hear from Katie Tsai later about the progress on immunotherapy toxicity with respect to fertility that she's doing, and in a study where they actually have blood available, but doing these things prospectively can be better in terms of being able to get all the clinical data that you need, as well as any planned laboratory data. So I think it's really good to know. Are there studies in the adjuvant setting that are ongoing that investigators might think about looking at late effect issues?
At this point, I think they're largely for metastatic or more advanced disease. I did not hear of any particularly in the adjuvant setting. Some are in neoadjuvant, some are with single doses. So there's a variety of concepts with immunotherapy. And I think if someone had a particular interest, we could figure out how those might interface.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Dr. Gunteru, I know that the lung committee sort of conflicts with this one. You were going to try to make it. Not sure if I saw you on the line.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Any updates from the lung committee?
New update, it's mostly focused on the therapeutics too, trying to see whether we can incorporate survivorship, especially in radiation or brain metastasis. So, right now we do not have any update.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Trong, I think you were likely not going to be able to attend. Speak up if you were able to make it. And I know Dr. Davis from the AYA committee is not able to attend either. Yes, you are able to attend?
I am, yeah.
Wonderful.
So I do think that there is one concept coming that was presented at the AYA committee, was that on Tuesday, that is pretty relevant to our committee as well as the symptom management committee, and that's a chemotherapy induced peripheral neuropathy prevention concept coming out of Ohio State based on some retrospective and preclinical data that looks very interesting. They're going to be focusing on ALL for now, and it is early, so their first step is a large retrospective, but they are proposing a prospective study as well. So that's something to kind of keep our eye on.
Do you know what the intervention is?
Low dose TKI, tyrosine kinase inhibitor.
The intervention for preventing the neuropathy?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we'd love to hear more about that. Although I think most of the neuropathy stuff, as you mentioned, is going through the quality of life committee. We have some kind of not entirely intuitive divides between the committees just for historical reasons. But
right.
Yeah, that'd be of interest to hear more about that.
Miriam Lusberg and Bhavana Bhatnagar, who were presenting that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I know Dr. Gunturu is on the line, and I don't know if Dr. Klemp is also on the line, but any updates from the Digital Engagement Committee?
If Jen is not on the line from the digital engagement, if there are a few things that we can help with the studies. One is, let's say if it is not accruing, then maybe we can push the studies on the social media, work with the marketing and get it in the limelight to increase the accrual. So that's the one thing. And our digital engagement team is also working on plain language too. So more to come on that.
So there was an advertisement that was being put together for 1501. And do you know what ever happened with that?
So I think Justin is on the line too.
Justin, do you want to comment on that ad that was being put together for 1501? You should be able to unmute. There you go.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So that a lot of the casting got put on hold for COVID, and all the script, everything's been written. They had started casting, but then COVID put the casting on. We reached out, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, to Jonathan Summers on the DE committee. He may or may not be on the call, but they had gotten some direction, and I believe we're going to start back up the casting process. So it's moving ahead, but COVID did it slow everything else down, really slowed that down a bunch.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Constein, I think you were planning on joining the second half of this meeting. I'm not sure. I don't see you on the line yet, but if you're there, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll move on to Dr. Kraus. I see you're on the line. Any updates from the surgery committee?
Well, I think the main well, sorry, I don't know why I'm echoing. I don't know that there's a lot going on in the surgery committee actually right now, and a lot of potential studies that should have cancer survivorship involvement, and so I think it's I don't have anything specific to say, but I will encourage within the different, surgery, of course, is a supportive committee, but things that are coming out of there should be signed off by survivorship are. But it's much more active as far as considering different studies at this point. Most of them are survival. So I think that's it.
Great. All right. Well, continue to keep us posted. Thank you. And then the remaining liaisons, Dr. Prozak, Alwadi, Saeed, and Sai have all indicated to us that they weren't going to be able to attend. If that has changed and any of you are on the line, here's your opportunity to speak up. Otherwise, perhaps you can keep us updated by email regarding any updates with your committees. All right, thank you. So we'll move on to, it looks like Dr. Leha is on, and perhaps you could share with us updates regarding the cardiac advisory panel.
So right now, we're actually reaching out to some of the immunotherapy trials. Dr. Hayek actually created a concept where we're right now reaching out to industry to figure out if we can get troponin and BMP funded actually for immunotherapy. So we're waiting right now on Dr. Hayek to come back with us on that information, and we'll be reaching out soon to create our next meeting.
Great, thank you. And you just had a meeting?
I just had a meeting about creating a cardiac tumor registry. Most cardiac tumors are sarcomas. And we are trying to create an internet. Right now, there's a multi-center cardiac tumor conference, which is via telehealth. We're trying to expand that, and right now creating a registry and a biobank surrounding that. So in terms of the registry, we're in the initial phases and working out things such as governance, all these type of issues, but that hopefully we'll be able to present that at our next cardiac advisory panel.
Okay, great. And then just a reminder, as people are developing concepts, especially if there's going to be any sort of cardiac toxicity endpoint, it's important to advise, in addition to our advocate, advise the cardiac advisory panel early on, and that way we can, collect the most rigorous endpoints and get and take advantage of all the expertise that we have in this area.
Yes, I encourage you to ask any ideas and need ideas about endpoints or just new concepts to please email me, and I will forward on to the group.
Great, thank you. And then at our last meeting, we had a speaker, we had Betty Kahn speak about sarcopenic obesity. And since then, there's been some concepts thrown around. There's one that came out of the GI group, and then another in development in our group. We actually had a little working group to discuss these concepts. Melinda, do you want to provide updates on the discussions with that group?
Yeah, the feedback is odd. Can you hear me?
We hear you fine, yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we continue to be very interested in sarcopenia and various outcomes, whether it be mortality or side effects, toxicity, whatnot. And we have a number of members who are experts in this area. Betty Kahn, who had a great presentation in April presenting this and is available to co-author, co-lead some of these analyses. There are two concepts in development or in progress. The GI group we should look to invite them to present at a follow-up meeting, Hallie, to hear about their analyses. And then Vicki, who I think is on the call, is looking to submit a revised concept for approval. And then we hope to also learn more about how these scans are then collected and archived for analyses, and look to have Dr. Schwartz present in a follow-up survivorship committee meeting as well. I know this is a topic of high interest to NCI. Joanna Lena, who leads the area in this from the NCI, has a number of program announcements out and administrative supplements on this topic. So we welcome your interest in this and reaching out to us, and we will help to facilitate research in this area.
Thanks, Melinda. And just backtracking to Monica's piece, and I lost the chat. I saw a question from the chat pop up asking, oh, do you need any additional members of the cardiac advisory panel, specifically from an NCOR site? We actually do have, I think you already, there is already some involvement from NCOR. Monica, are you able to comment on that?
There is involvement. If you send me your information, we're always happy to add to the group.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then speaking of, Dr. Floyd, do you want to update us on where things stand with 1501?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Monica, feel free to chime in if I say anything incorrect. Don't be shy. You can correct me or have anything to add. So 1501 is the prospective evaluation of carvedilol in prevention of cardiac toxicity in patients with metastatic HER2 overexpressing breast cancer. It has been open for about 3 years, and we are moving along. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
That's all right. I think I only had a couple slides. So this is the schema. A little busy, but and I think probably everyone on the call has seen this many times, but for those of you who haven't, or for sites that don't have it open, we are definitely looking for additional sites. So this is the schema. It's essentially metastatic HER2 overexpressing breast cancer patients who are at high risk for developing cardiac toxicity from trastuzumab. Really, the only requirement up front is that they're getting HER2 targeted therapy. They have a baseline ejection fraction of 50% or higher, and they have one high-risk feature of subsequent cardiac toxicity, such as anthracycline use, elevated BMI, hypertension, et cetera. And those patients are randomized to carvedilol or no carvedilol. There is a non-randomized arm, pretty close to full. Well, it's not actually close to full. I'd say it's over half full for patients who otherwise would be eligible but are on a ACE inhibitor or beta blocker. Patients are followed for 2 years with every 3-month echoes. The primary endpoint is cardiac dysfunction, a decrease in ejection fraction, with a lot of secondary endpoints, including but not limited to cardiac events. There's also biospecimens collected at baseline and throughout, looking for biomarkers. This is our accrual as of, I believe, it was mid-September. So you can see from October 19 to mid-September, we kind of peaked and then COVID hit and we crashed and burned as most sites had closed cancer control trials. We've since started to pick back up, and hopefully that trend continues. If you look, there are sites and like Case Western, like City of Hope, even our NCORE, Heartland NCORE, who have been able to have really robust accrual. And so if you're interested in the trial, if you get a system in place of screening patients on Herceptin, you really can accrue robustly to the study. Cancer control is starting up again. Sites are able to do this, we're hearing throughout the country. And so if you don't have it open and you're interested, reach out to us at the email there, s1501question@swog.org. We would love to have you as a site, and especially anyone on the call that has an active cardio-oncology program in their institution. We would sure love to have you be a part of the trial. We've seen that those are the type of sites that really can accrue robustly. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
You're muted there, Hallie. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, as at the Cleveland Clinic, we're part of the Case Comprehensive Cancer Center, and we've actually done very well in accruing. And part of it, I just wanted to let you all know, it's a very easy study to accrue to. The only real barrier is that initial Echo Lab certification, which is a little bit of a process, but once you've done that, it's actually very easy to put patients on this trial, and it's not a whole lot of work. So I would encourage you, if you have this open, to look at all your patients that are getting trastuzumab and think about whether they might be eligible. And if you don't have it open, it's something definitely to consider. And Justin, is there still funding available for certifying the Echo Lab?
No, it's a good question. So at the beginning, we did have a small amount of funding to help pay for the accreditation, and that was through the NCI, and that's been spent.
Okay. All right, but still worthwhile for your patients.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hallie. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay, and then we'll spend the last part of our meeting here just updating on some of the previously presented concepts, a number of which have faced some difficulties which we can all learn from. So the concepts here will have some updates. Dr. Markowitz was not able to attend today, something about being on a U.S. aircraft carrier in his email. I don't really know the details, but his R01 is going to be reviewed in a month at the end of October, and will be reviewed by the nursing and related clinical sciences section, which is what he was hoping for. So hopefully it'll come back with a favorable review. We'll have to see. I don't know if anybody else participating in that study has additional updates or comments. Then we'll move on. Dr. Barakos, are you on the line? So we are, Dr. Barakos had submitted a concept looking at loss of muscle and fat mass induced by inflammation, disease progression, and treatment toxicity in S0816, and basically using the CAT scans to look at sarcopenia measures. And we have had an initial concept that was favorably reviewed, and we are looking forward to the more extended write-up, which I believe she's working on. So we will share progress on that as we learn about it. And then Dr. Chakraborty, are you on the line? I know we have a lot of competing meetings at the same time. Are you on? I just heard a noise.
I did you see his comment? He said that he's muted and can't unmute.
Oh, could we
Okay.
unmute? Could we unmute Dr. Raj
Yeah,
Chakraborty?
I think I'm unmuted now. Can you guys hear
There
me?
you are.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, I wanted to discuss hurdles that we faced in this project on modeling thrombosis risk in patients with moderate myeloma therapy. So we looked at the SWOG S0777 trial, which compared VRD, that is Velcade Revlimid index to Revlimid index in patients with multiple myeloma. And our goal was to check for the incidence of venous thromboembolism as well as to investigate the risk factors of venous thromboembolism in this study. So the first step was getting the data. So when we reached out to the myeloma committee, they said that we had to obtain the data from the NCORP, NCTN archive because the data was already submitted there. So then I worked with Dr. Moore in obtaining data from the NCORP, NCTN archive, and they sent us to our institution the data in a PDF and Excel format. And when we reviewed the data, we found that a few things were missing. So first of all, exact date of adverse event was missing, since the first specific aim of our project was to look at the incidence of VTE in the first 12 months after treatment initiation. So that was a problem. And I talked to the study statistician, and they said that apparently the exact dates of the adverse event was not reported. There was only a reporting period, but the data that we got from NCTN archive did not even have a reporting period in that. And then the second thing was looking at, we had pre-specified the patient-reported, patient-related, disease-related, and treatment-related risk factors that we would look into. And two critical variables to look into was prior history of VTE and surgery within 90 days prior to treatment initiation, both of which have been consistently shown in several studies to be an important determinant of VTE in multiple myeloma. And both of these were not available, were not as a part of the baseline characteristics in the trial. Some of the baseline characteristics, for example, age and race in people of interest was available, but those two were not available. Again, I reached out to the study statistician and they said they were not collected, unfortunately. So without some of those important variables, it would be very hard to create a risk score, with incomplete variables and some of the variables that we already know from prior data that has a robust predictive ability for VTE myeloma. So these are some of the, we have the data. We could look at the variables and the what risk factors among the variables that we have received. But that would be a major limitation. We don't have some of the major risk factors. I was looking, to feedback from the group and, regarding in these situations, maybe some of the newer trials that have more robust data collection, regarding adverse events. But I think that was one of the limitations of this study.
Yeah, so again, kind of stressing why thinking about secondary analyses at the time studies are developed can be helpful. Obviously, we're trying to look at what we can do with this vast amount of data we already have from studies, but yeah, when the studies don't collect what we need, that can be an issue. I'm going to come back to you, Katie, in just a minute, but I don't know, Dr. Gunteru, if you've had similar problems in your secondary analysis of 1404. I know you can't present the data until the primary study outcomes are presented.
We have the data. I'm just, we have all the data. It's more of waiting for overall survival because the chair wanted to present overall survival and toxicity together. So I'm hoping 2021 would be the presentation time.
Okay, great. Any other updates? Okay. All right, very good. And then Katie, you have some slides that I'm trying to share here. There we go. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am. Can you hear and see me?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. So thank you, Melinda, Hallie, for providing some time to present. I can be relatively brief since not too much has changed about the study design, but happy to provide some updates as well. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So I think probably for this audience, the fact that immune checkpoint inhibitors have really exploded in terms of the number of indications in terms of cancer types over the past decade or so has really accelerated. Also within melanoma, the indications for anti-PD-1 agents just keeps getting moved further and further up in the disease course. Anti-PD-1 drugs are now approved in the adjuvant setting. There are also plenty of neoadjuvant trials currently ongoing looking for benefit in that population. So, despite this widespread use and despite possible mechanisms of gonadal toxicity in both male and female patients, the present data really consists of, number one, animal models, and number two, anecdotal case reports from colleagues around the world looking at pregnancy outcomes, successful or otherwise. So there really is essentially no data to guide how best to counsel patients who will be embarking on a long-term course of immunotherapy. And as a result, as you can imagine, there is really varied opinion, varied practice patterns, varied referral patterns regarding just how necessary fertility preservation is in these patients. Next slide. So S1404 is an adjuvant study ongoing within melanoma. The study chair is Dr. Kenneth Grossman, that enrolled over 1,300 patients. And these patients were randomized to receive either pembrolizumab or interferon versus ipilimumab, which reflected the standard of care at the time of study conception and execution. So the goal was to leverage these serum samples, which were collected as part of their research aims, both at baseline and periodically throughout the study. And really the primary objective of this proposed study was to estimate the effect of immunotherapy on gonadal reserve in both men and women. And the proposal was to do this by looking at the frozen serum samples at baseline and also at one other time point, week 25 on the study. These outcomes would also be adjusted according to age and also treatment arms. I mentioned earlier that some of these patients might have received interferon on the study. Since we're focusing on the effect of immune checkpoint inhibition, we'd be looking at only the patients who received ipilimumab or pembrolizumab. Next slide.
There you go.
Thank you. And in terms of clinical endpoints or how exactly we'll go about doing this, so for women, anti-Müllerian hormone or AMH can be immunoassayed for, and this is a marker of ovarian reserve. It's pretty specific. It's exclusively produced by ovarian follicles, and in the reproductive endocrinology and infertility space is certainly widely used as a marker of ovarian reserve. For men, with input with one of my colleagues here at UCSF, Dr. Mitchell Rosen, the idea was to look at inhibin B and also follicular stimulation hormone, or FSH, as a marker of Sertoli cell function, which is where spermatogenesis takes place. For a while, it was unclear that the study would be feasible based on numbers, but then working closely with the study biostatisticians, using these criteria, it turned out that out of the 13 or close to 1,400 patients on study, it looked like we would have about 70 and about 80 men with samples that would be eligible to undergo this analysis. One other challenge, which thankfully was overcome, was trying to find an appropriate lab to get this done. I discovered that, of course, thinking about freeze-thaw cycles and minimizing impact on biospecimens, the original idea was to have this done at UCSF for various reasons, including volume of serum required and also, which of these labs could be done here versus externally. I was referred through the Oncofertility Consortium to ANCH Labs, which is based in Texas, which are able to do all three of these immunoassays with a minimum amount of serum. Next slide. So the primary analysis, again, is to evaluate changes in hormone levels from baseline to week 25, controlling type 1 error with a two-sided alpha 0.05 and using paired t-tests. You can see here the power calculations to detect a decrease in gonadal reserve in both men and women. And as I mentioned earlier, these will also be adjusted for treatment arm and age. Next slide. So this study has been a bit of a long time in coming. I think the concept was initially approved or was initially presented in 2000, maybe late 2018. In 2019, I presented to and received really helpful feedback, from the SWOG survivorship committees as well as the AYA committee, and certainly, Ken Grossman within melanoma has been really helpful in pushing this forward as well. There was a initial logistics to be worked out in terms of feasibility and the volume of serum required. Thankfully, as of now, at least, that all seems to have been worked out, and this concept has been approved by the Translational Medicine Committee. In the summer of this past year, we had a financial feasibility call, and really the next steps are to secure, now that I know it's feasible, to secure the appropriate funding, and I plan to do that through some internal UCSF funds. I know Hallie and Melinda also mentioned the Hope Foundation Seed Fund earlier, which is built for pilot projects, which I think this falls squarely within that realm. And I do plan on applying for that December 1st deadline this year. Thank you. If any of you have questions or need to commiserate about some challenges in getting studies off the ground, happy to address those. And as Krishna Gunchru mentioned, we're both, these are both studies based on the same adjuvant study, S1404. And even though this study, we don't have data, so we're a little bit, behind Krishna, but certainly there's been a lot of talk about, how best to time the protocol revision with release of the primary endpoints as well. Thank you. Oh, Hallie, you might still be muted.
Thank you. You'd think I'd learn that by now. Anyway, so I know you think progress is slow, but I think it's fantastic, the progress that you've made on this, and because it's not easy, all the hoops that you have to jump through, and you've done a great job with this. So congratulations on getting this far. We look forward to
all of your support.
All right, other comments on this study? And then the last update is on the COG and intergroup fertility study, looking at GnRH analogs for ovarian protection in AYA patients with cancer. And this is specifically looking at a non-breast cancer population. And again, looking at the impact of ovarian function suppression with a GnRH agonist in AYA patients who do not have breast cancer who are receiving alkylating agent chemotherapy. And the primary endpoint is going to be measures of ovarian reserve using AMH at 2 years post-therapy for those with or without the GnRH agonist. And so this study is going to include, and some of this is still under debate and investigation, but currently we're looking at including women ages 12 to 39 with newly diagnosed non-breast cancers. Participants must be post-menarchal females, and the planned treatment has to include an alkylating agent of no more than 12 months. Maintenance therapies with non-alkylating agents are permitted, and we are not including patients who are having radiation to the pelvis, including TBI. And then there's been some discussion. I know our Dr. Haider Saeed has been participating in these discussions, representing our lymphoma committee about whether dacarbazine should be included. And I think the consensus is probably not, since it doesn't appear to have a whole lot of gonadal toxicity. And we don't want to dilute the outcomes. So basically, the primary outcome is going to be the change from baseline over time, over 2 years, of AMH levels. And they're going to be looking at a variety of different time points. And also, they're going to be looking at estrogen deprivation symptoms, sexual function symptoms, menstrual patterns, and quality of life. And also, this will be a cohort for whom hopefully we'll be able to have some longer term follow-up regarding reproductive health outcomes. So that's kind of in progress. That is going through the COG first, and so that's the primary committee that's going to do the statistics and hold the data. Dawn, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are. Oftentimes we have intergroup studies where one group leads and others join as we go along. It's less common that these studies are co-developed, which is what's happening now. And I don't know if you have any insights for how to proceed with making sure that all the groups are on board. Dawn may have stepped away, so we'll have to follow up with her about that. All right, Melinda, anything else that you wanted to bring up at this meeting?
No, I think I keep hearing feedback. Sorry.
Let me try muting.
I hope that today's meeting energize some individuals to think of concepts, knowing that the pilot funding available through HOPE and SWOG, there aren't a lot of concepts that are submitted. I've participated as a reviewer on them, so it's a pay line that's higher than NIH and a faster turnaround too. So, you know, Hallie and I really would love to see some concepts, even if it's a sentence or two or a paragraph emailed to us, and we can take it from there and help develop it. I thought today was good to kind of get us back on track, energize, and hopefully stimulate some discussion.
Yeah, and we know this is a challenge with not everybody being able to be in the participation group, and it's a little harder to get recognized and get in. But if you raise your hands, if anybody has additional questions or anything you'd like to add, we can unmute you and share that. I'll pause for just a minute to allow for any last questions or comments. After which we can we might be wrapping up early, which is novel for this group.
And I think our next call is, I don't have it on my calendar. It's usually mid-October. So,
Hallie?
Yeah.
It's Dawn, Dizon. So just FYI, I think it's going to be relevant for the survivorship group. Digital engagement is inviting some technology partners to SWOG to hear about some of their products. The one that just presented is called Blue Note Therapeutics. And actually, I'm bringing this up based on the presentation from the NIH. They have a new anxiety and depression behavioral system management program that is being investigated as a digital tool. And they're very interested in transitions of care, particularly around survivorship, fear of recurrence. So I think if there is interest, I'm happy to make the introduction, Melinda and Hallie, to the Blue Note Therapeutics team. But again, I think it would be a nice thing to help control survivorship or look at in the survivorship space.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd be happy to meet with them, and then if there is some, you know, if somebody in your committee is interested in putting forward a concept, that could be presented at one of our meetings. Yep. Great, thank you. And by the way, our next phone call is October 9th.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks. Anybody else? Final comments? All right, thanks to you all for your attention, and hopefully we won't be doing too many more of these digitally. We look forward to seeing everybody in person in the not so distant future.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks. Great meeting, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brooke, and to others helping us out.